Um, okay, so starting off, I'd like to introduce people to what DevOps Center is. It's a DevOps offering from Salesforce, um, and the nice thing is it's available to be installed in your org and used for free. We'll talk about some different topology choices in just a sec, um, and as an alternative to something like change sets, it integrates with version control. So you don't need to be a Git expert to use DevOps Center. Um, it will take care of the branching and the Git operations and stuff for you. So that's kind of nice. So starting off, just setting the expectation what DevOps is. A lot of people think DevOps is just a set of tools. It's really a combination of things. It's cultural changes, philosophical changes, and tools. And it's the combination of these things that let you deliver applications at a faster velocity. The whole point of DevOps is to make the movement of changes throughout your sandboxes and into production easier, so that you can deliver features to your customers quicker and more reliably. So, the culture philosophy, it is an organizational shift, and I've worked with a number of customers who've been using Salesforce for a while, and this is probably the toughest part of the DevOps change process, is changing how they're used to doing things to doing things in a different way. And the truth is, what you want to do to be successful is you want to try and look for small wins and make small changes along the way. You don't want to try and do just switch over and do everything using DevOps Center right away, or any DevOps tool. You want to look for small things that you can start to ease the culture into using DevOps. And it's really the cyclical thing. So it's all about starts off with planning, then you do your code and your building, you test, release, deploy, you have operational aspects, you monitor that, but then you're going back and you're making more changes. Then it's this cyclical thing that just keeps happening. A lot of terms in DevOps that people talk about, different practices. And a lot of these you may be doing already. So things like agile planning, trying to do your work in short iterations, looking for easy wins that can make changes easier on in the system, rather than giant changes that encompass months of preparation. Those are more likely to fail. Continuous development, developing in small portions and continuously working on things, treating everything as code. It doesn't matter whether you're creating a field on an object, creating a flow, editing permission set, whatever you're doing, treating all of that as code that needs to move through the pipeline. Automated testing ends up being really important. So making sure that there's a way to test changes as they're made. And this is not just testing the thing that you develop, but also regression testing and making sure that the thing you didn't break something else that's in the org. There's lots of examples where you could create a validation rule and suddenly you break all these flows and triggers and stuff behind the scenes. You didn't realize that was the case. You need regression testing to do this. And the reason that automated is important is because this is boring stuff. If you ask someone, okay, click through, every time we make a change, you have to click through the entire application and verify that everything's working the same. People are going to get bored. They're not going to enjoy doing that. It's going to be a tedious thing. You want this to be an automated process where every time you make a change, it just kicks off this system that's going to check and make sure that everything's okay. And this this leads into, and you can't have the next three things without having automated testing: continuous delivery, deployment, and monitoring. Um, Delivery of functionality into higher environments, so you don't let something sit in a dev org that somebody's been working on for months. You want to move stuff along as quickly as possible, continuously deploying to see what how changes are impacting other things, um, and then always monitoring to detect any problems. And then in terms of the tools, DevOps, people, and this is usually what people think of when they think of DevOps, they're like, oh, all the tools. So you have things like version control. It's the center of DevOps is having a system of truth that provides versioned information. So you can see how the changes are made over time and why something has changed. You might look at a field or a formula or something, you might think, why is that there? Who did that? Well, if you don't have version control, then you probably have no way of knowing that. You don't know what it used to be. Maybe the formula used to work and now it's not working anymore. Why is that? Well, you can find out why it was changed, who made the change, what feature was it associated with when you have version control. Now, in order to use version control, you have to be able to extract the metadata from Salesforce, and so that you can put it into version control. So there's tools for extracting that metadata and then taking the metadata and deploying it to the next sandbox. You need tools to be able to do that. You need testing tools. Again, automation tools are ultimately where you want to get to. And then probably ultimately, all these things can be done manually by a person, but kind of like testing, the manual steps end up being onerous, and the harder and more boring something is to do, the less likely it's going to get done. So if you can have a DevOps platform that kind of removes some of that monotony from the tasks, makes it easier to do these things. So something that maybe takes an hour manually to do takes 5 minutes to do with a tool. That's a big win. And that lets people focus on other things. So this is a question a lot of customers will say is, well, we've been doing Salesforce for the last 10 years. Isn't what we're doing good enough? And I think if you're asking that question, the answer is always going to be no. If you're not asking that question, you're not asking the right questions. But I've never encountered a customer that couldn't be doing more. Maybe they're doing really, really great in terms of version control and checking things into metadata, but then they don't have any automated testing. Maybe they don't have a good pipeline system, so when changes are made, they're automatically deployed to, once they're approved, they're deployed to the next environment. So there's always ways to improve. Okay, so now we're going to look at some basic stuff. This is where I'm going to switch over to the live screens, just because it's a little bit easier and a little more interesting to look at. So setting up DevOps Center, there's some basic initial steps. DevOps Center comes as a managed package, but first you have to enable it. So there's a little toggle that you enable. Once you enable it, that cannot be disabled. So some people are a little concerned about doing this in production, because it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to make this change yet. That's okay. What you could do is you could use a dev org, just spin up a dev org on your own. You don't have a lot of users that you can log in and test things out as, but at least you have a couple of users you can create and test things. But that would let you test out DevOps Center without jeopardizing your production instance. Once you enable that, you still have to go through the process of installing a package. So if at some point you didn't want DevOps Center anymore, you could uninstall the package and just clean that up, and then it's basically gone from your system, but that little toggle is still there. There's a connected app that you have to create to make it easy for people to access DevOps Center. You're going to potentially add users. Now, this is, again, someplace where customers sometimes have some challenges, because you want the developers to be able, you want to enable a developer to be able to go in and check items into their story and stuff, the stuff that they worked on. You don't want to pass that off to someone else. But a lot of customers I've worked with, developers don't have access to production. So that can be an issue as well. There is a license that you can, if you don't have it, you can request it from Salesforce. It's a free license called the limited license, and it basically gives the developers the ability to, they're still users, they can log into production, but they're limited to only access DevOps Center. They can't access anything else in production. We'll talk about topology choices in just a sec, but that's one thing that you can do is you can use that license if your developers don't have production access. There's a set of permission sets that you want to assign, and then some session settings, and then you're good to go. So just in terms of installing DevOps Center, let me just zoom in a little bit so you can probably see this a little bit better. So I've already installed it here in this org. So in setup, if you go to dev, if you type in dev in the search box, you'll see DevOps Center. You click on that, and the first thing you'll have is this little toggle switch. You have to click that to enable DevOps Center, and then once you enable it, then there's a link here to install, a button here to install the package. And you go through a package install for doing that. Once you install it, then you create your connected app, and that's just a standard connected app. So I created that. They even give you a little, the setup, the instructions go through all the setup steps, but they give you like a little icon link for it and everything. So you get a little icon for it, but you can use your own icon if you want to. It's your own connected app, but pretty basic setup done here. And then you assign permission sets. So there's a set of permission sets that you want to create for this. So there are these three: DevOps Center Manager, DevOps Center Release Manager. These give different levels of permission within DevOps Center. And then there's a couple, and let's cut off here because of my zoom. At the bottom here, there's a couple more that that you assign. I like to create permission set groups. I don't remember if I did it on this one or not. Yeah, I did. So I create permission set groups just to group these permissions together. So that way, if somebody's a release manager, I just give them this permission set group rather than having to remember which permission sets to assign to them. And then once you do that, you will be able to go to the application, and it's a custom application called for DevOps Center here. This is basically what it looks like. I have a number of you can create a number of projects. I'm going to go through the process of creating a project in just a sec here, but you can have as many projects as you need to. One of the cool things about DevOps Center is that behind the scenes, these are all Salesforce objects. So you can add fields as necessary to them if you want to. You can run reports on them if you want to do reporting on your work items, get information about the different work items, what stages they're in, how long they were in a particular stage. That's all available because this is all data inside Salesforce. In terms of topology, you do want to think about how you're going to set up DevOps Center. The traditional way of doing it is to install it in your production environment, and then you would control the various sandboxes that lead up to production. Now in DevOps Center, there's actually no requirement that the orgs that you're connected to as that are part of a project, and I'm going to show you connecting to orgs in just a sec. There's no requirement that these orgs actually be sandboxes of this prod. They could be dev orgs for all you know. They could be completely unrelated. They don't have to be sandboxes that were spun up from this prod org, but typically they would be. So you could install DevOps Center in your production and then have it control the pipeline that goes to that production org, or you could create a tooling org and have that separate tooling org control the pipeline that goes across your sandboxes into your production. This would be a solution that you might want to approach if you really don't want to give people access to production. You have sensitive data there, for example, but they still need to be able to access the DevOps Center to do DevOps Center activities. You could create a separate tooling org for that.
So real quick, Alan,
Yep.
so
Yep.
do a lot of customers sometimes have a separate production org just for DevOps if it's a very large customer?
Yeah, a lot of customers do. I work with a lot of enterprise customers that have, multiple orgs. I think the most I've had for one customer is like 15 different production orgs. So you could have, if you're in a situation like that, you probably already have one that's not really used for much, or it used to be used and it's not really used anymore. You can just designate that as your tooling org or something. But yeah, the customers in large enterprises, they often have multiple orgs like that. Smaller customers probably not, and that's where probably the top path, the top pipeline would be the one that you'd probably be most interested in. You could, again, create that bottom one and use a developer org as your tooling org if you wanted to, a free developer org. The problem with that, of course, is you only have a couple of users that you can log in as, so it's kind of limited. But if you're like a two-person shop, there's like lots of really small customers that are using Salesforce. They don't have a lot of developers. Maybe it's one person who does most of the things, and maybe they're okay. Sometimes they have a contractor come in and do some work for them in their dev org, but they're okay being the person who moves that metadata up. You could still have that separate dev org as your tooling org. But for that person, they also have, they're also admin and production, so it's probably not an issue to install it in prod either. So another requirement for any of the sandboxes that you want to use as development sandboxes for DevOps Center, you have to have source tracking turned on. If you're not familiar with source tracking, it's basically a mechanism that Salesforce uses to keep an eye on what's changed in an org from what's in the source that it has stored locally, and it uses diffs and stuff to try and figure out what's changed. And that is a requirement for the dev sandboxes that are used in DevOps Center. No other sandboxes need to have source tracking on, but the dev ones do. Okay, so it just has some screenshots for installing DevOps Center. Oh, it just outlines the different permission sets, which I already showed you. Creating a connected app. Behind the scenes, DevOps Center currently only supports GitHub for doing version control. There are, on the roadmap, there are plans to support other version control systems like Bitbucket. I think GitLab is on the list as well. But right now, GitHub is the only thing that's supported. If you have a GitHub that instance where you have a restricted IP list that can access your GitHub repo, you will have to give the IP addresses that DevOps Center uses access to that GitHub. So, for example, if maybe you don't want the world, or just anyone being able to access your GitHub repo, you have it controlled to only your IP subnet within your company. You have a set of IP addresses that you're allowing access to GitHub. You'd have to add these ones to the list, and then also the Salesforce IP ranges. And interestingly, so if just a little behind the scenes thing, if you do an NS lookup on these IP addresses, you can actually see that these are AWS instances. So behind the scenes, DevOps Center uses AWS EC2 instances to do its DevOps work. So it's kind of interesting. Okay, so next, working with DevOps Center. So again, like I said, DevOps Center, standard Salesforce objects. Well, they're custom for DevOps Center, but there's Salesforce objects behind the scenes. And these are the main ones that you care that are involved here. There are some others, but these are the main ones. So kind of the center of everything is the project. And the project is just, it's epitomizing or establishing the work that you're doing. Projects can be really short-lived, they can be long-lived, it's totally up to you. Probably you don't want hundreds of different projects in your DevOps Center, because then managing projects becomes a full-time job, and you don't want that, right? You want something that's fairly simple, but you might have like you might have your main project, and that's where most of your ongoing work is done, and then maybe you have like a special project because there's some special feature that you wanted in, or somebody's installing some nonprofit cloud or something, and so you want just a special project dealing with just that work or something. So you can create as many projects as you need to, but again, it's just something you want to think about. How many do you really want? But project is the central concept, the central object around this, and everything else kind of comes off a project. So a project gets connected to a repository. Technically, you could have multiple projects that use the same repository. That can get kind of messy, if a project is over and you just create a new project using the same repo, probably isn't a big deal. But if you have multiple projects that are using that same repo and they're both ongoing, I would say you probably want to separate those into separate Git repos rather than having all your projects pointing at the same Git repo, because you're just increasing the chances of stepping on each other if you're doing that. So I would say typically it's going to be a one-to-one relationship between projects and Git repos. And then associated with a project are work items. And work items are basically user stories. So they're a unit of work that a person is doing some Salesforce work, and we're going to look at all these in just a sec, but it's a unit of work that people are doing. So that's associated with a project, and you can have multiple work items in a project. And then the other things we have are pipelines and environments. So pipeline is basically, environments are the different sandboxes that lead up to your production or target org. And then pipeline is basically the representation of the relationship between those environments. So you have one environment that feeds to the next, that feeds to the next. And then from those, we have different stages for the pipeline. So those are the main objects involved. So if I go over here, my DevOps Center, I'm going to go ahead and create a new project. I'm going to call it Rocky Mount. So I'm going to call this project Rocky Mount. And when you create a new project, you have a choice. So the very first time you create a project is going to ask you, hey, you got to log into GitHub. I've already logged into GitHub, so it's not asking me that. But it basically creates a named credential behind the scenes for you, so it can communicate with GitHub. So mine's already connected. I have that named credential for GitHub. So my repo owner is already filled in here, and it filled in the repository name that matches the project name. There's no requirement that they match, but again, why complicate things if you don't need to? Unless there's some reason you don't want them named the same, I would just leave them named the same. So when you're creating a new project, you can either have DevOps Center create the Git repo for you, or you can point to an existing Git repo. So again, this would kind of depend on where you're at in the whole project process. If you're starting a new project, you're probably going to have it create the repo for you. It's kind of nice, it does that for you. But if you already created a repo, you're part partially into a project, and now you're just getting started with DevOps Center, then you'd be taking DevOps Center and pointing it to an existing repo rather than a new repo. And then there's a description section down here below. So I'm just going to have it create the repo for me. I'm going to say save. Oh, and then one thing to note here, it says every project must use the Salesforce DX project structure. So if you're using like the old metadata format that was used with Ant and stuff, that's not going to work with DevOps Center. So you definitely would want to create a new repo for that. So here I have the project that just got created. So here's my project name, the owner, repository URL. If I click on that, it just opens up GitHub, points to it. You can see that it's a nice empty project here. It has a main branch. That's the only branch that exists right now. And then you can't really do anything else with this project until you connect to a release environment. So there's a little thing under release environment that says click to connect. Basically, if you click anywhere here, it's going to say add your release environment. So this is the release environment is the end environment, the target environment that this stuff is going to go to. Typically, this would probably be a production environment, but it doesn't have to be. You could have everything go to a sandbox, and then from there have a different process that moves stuff into production if you wanted to. In my view, that kind of defeats the purpose of using DevOps to move things, but there might be a reason to do that. To give it a name, there is a requirement that this name across all the projects has to be unique. So even though all these different projects could still be pointing to the same prod, you just can't call it prod in every project. It's just a name. It's what's going to show up in the pipeline and stuff. So I'm just going to call this Rocky Mount prod. I'm going to say it's my prod environment, and it's going to ask me to log in. So it should prompt me here. So I'm going to log in here. And just takes a sec to update. There we go. Okay, so now that guy is connected, and so now I can, if I click on this project, I get into the pipeline. And so here it's basically asking me, okay, now you need to set up the different environments that are part of this pipeline. You don't just have one target environment, you're gonna have to have something that leads up to that. And it fills it in with some, so here's the one I just set up at the very end here. And it fills in some intermediate environments here, and then it has development environments here at the very far, on the far left. So the idea is that metadata is going to move from these development environments across to this target environment eventually. And it's set up integration, UAT, and staging. You don't have to have all those intermediate environments if you don't want to. You can decide what your pipeline is going to look like. So maybe I'm going to remove this stage, and I'm going to remove this stage. Maybe I'm just going to have my development environment, a QA environment, and then my production environment. So simple project. I'm just going to have these. You'll notice here my end target here. It says it's going to be using the main branch. I could change that to a different branch name if I wanted to, but main is kind of the normal thing to call that end branch. So in this intermediate one, it's asking me to connect an environment and specify a branch. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to connect an environment. It's going to be a sandbox. So it's going to go to test.salesforce.com and ask me to log in. And I've already logged into QA to make this thing a little faster. Okay, so now my QA environment should be connected. Here's my QA environment. And then I also want to specify the branch. So I'm going to click on specify branch, and I'm just going to give it the unique name of QA. I usually name my environment, my branches, so that they match the environments. Again, no requirement, but you don't want to make your life more difficult than you need to. And once you get your stages set up, these are all of the different stages that are going to go into my pipeline. I'm ready to activate this pipeline. So right now, you can see it's not active, but it says ready to activate. There is a button here to add development environments. I don't have to do that right now if I don't want to. I can do that later on, because truth is, once you create a pipeline, your development environments might change. You might spin up a scratch org that you want to use as a development environment. You might spin up a new dev sandbox that you want to use as a development environment. You might refresh a dev sandbox. So there's all sorts of things that you can do. So you can modify the dev environments later on. You can modify the other stages as well, but basically you have to deactivate the pipeline, make your changes, and then reactivate it. So I'm going to go ahead and say activate. And I think at this point, I should have created my other branch. Yeah, so here you can see now my Git repo has 2 branches in it. If I go and look, it has a main branch and a QA branch. So DevOps Center created that branch for me. I didn't have to create the branch. So yeah, any questions so far? Those are kind of the main, like I said, I deviate from my slides because looking at screenshots just is super interesting. Connecting environment. Yes.
Can I ask about the bundling stage I saw in there? Is that when it's pulling all your individual pieces together and pushing to prod?
Yeah, so that's where you can bundle work items together and push them as a unit into the next environment. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so I covered all this, activated pipeline. Okay, so now we're ready to do some stuff. So over on the left-hand side for my project, I have 3 tabs here. I have work items, I have my pipeline, and then I have settings. Settings just lets me change the project name, give a description. The pipeline lets me look at the different stages. So the stages tab on the pipeline shows me the different work items and where they are in the pipeline. So right now I have no work items, so there's nothing really to see here, but it would show me my approved work items. I'd have the ability to promote those work items to the next environment. And then once I had work items here, they could get promoted to production. Environments, just as a view of the different environments. So again, it's just the active view of what I just set up. And then the activity history is nice. This shows us a history of what has been going on. We'll visit this again once I've done some stuff, because right now it's not terribly interesting. It just says I activated the pipeline. So the tab that you're going to work most on is the work items tab. And so think of work items as user stories. Potentially, so if you're using a product like Jira or something, you're probably already used to user stories. A work item would typically correspond to a user story, but it really depends on how you write your user stories. I've had some projects I've worked on where user stories are like super granular. So one user story will be create these fields. Another user story will be create this page layout. Another user story will be create this validation rule or something. Probably I would group those 3 into a single work item rather than making them individual, because it probably, certainly the page layout doesn't make sense to promote as a unit by itself. So you want to think about how these combine. You also might want to think, if that's how people are writing their user stories, you might want to reconsider how user stories are written, because I prefer if user stories correspond one-to-one with work items. It makes it a little bit easier to manage these things. If your user stories are super granular like that, then you're probably going to end up grouping multiple together into a single work item. Okay, so I guess first before I do a work item, I'm going to do some work. So here over in my dev environment, I haven't connected my dev environment yet. You'll see how to do that in a sec. This is my dev sandbox. Let me just zoom in on this a little bit. So let's say, I don't know, maybe I'll create a new object. So I'm going to create an object, call it Rocky users, Rocky user. Just something real simple here. And then it's like super slow. Let me just go ahead and create a field just so we can see a few things change. Okay, so I created an object in the field. Now, one of the things DevOps Center doesn't do for you, but it can help, is you still have to understand what metadata you changed in order to get stuff moved from one environment to another. And I find this is probably the hardest part for people to understand, because you can click on one thing in Salesforce. You can do like one thing, like create a field. Oh, okay, I created a field. That's what I did. Well, actually, you created a field. You've also touched the layout. You also modified profile. Maybe you, if you have permission set field tracking turned on, you modify permission sets potentially. So there's potentially multiple things that you've done, even though you think that you've just done one thing in Salesforce. That's probably the trickiest thing. Now, DevOps Center does help you try and find that metadata that you've changed, but it's still, as the person who made the change, it's still your responsibility to communicate that, or to at least get it into DevOps Center, because it's not going to know it for behind the scenes for you. This is one place where Scratch org, if you're doing Scratch org development, it can be really nice, because the Scratch org is private to you, and every change that you make, you just do you can just say get every change that was made in the org, and it just finds all these different things that were changed. A little harder to do in a sandbox where multiple people are working. Okay, so I'm going to create a new work item. I'm going to call it created custom object. You can give it a description here. If you had a Jira ticket, for example, you could put a URL to the Jira ticket in the description, so that there's a way to link it back to Jira. Again, this work item is a standard object. It's just a Salesforce object, and so you can create your own fields. And I've been working on my own little project to do a Jira integration, where I would actually have a Jira ID in there, and would be able to build the URL that points me back to Jira. So you could extend these objects as necessary, but out of the box, it doesn't have a field for Jira, because it's kind of agnostic with respect to the underlying project management system. And then down here, you can assign it to individuals. So maybe there's a particular developer. Maybe the person who creates the work item is the release manager or the business analyst or something. They're going through and creating the different work items that correspond to Jira stories, and then these are being assigned to various Salesforce developers. So you can assign it to someone, but it doesn't have to be assigned to anyone. This is just a way of identifying who this work item is associated with. Okay, so I went ahead and created this. It creates a name for you, WI000012. So it's just an auto-numbered work item here. You can see the subject of it, who it's assigned to. its status, the dev environment that it's connected to. In this case, I haven't connected to anything yet, so there's nothing here. And then when it was created. So I do want to be able to pull this from a dev sandbox. So over here in my environments tab, you'll notice I can't make changes to these guys here, but I can make changes here. I can add multiple dev environments. I'll just call this one dev1, actually Rocky dev1. Login, again, it'll go through the login screen to connect. Dev1, sandbox. So you do want to tell it where you're pulling metadata from. So you do need to connect some dev environment at some point. So you can have that there. You can have multiple dev environments. So I could have Rocky Dev 2, for example. This one, oh, I actually didn't want to do that. So we want to connect to a different environment. I want to go to, conveniently, I have another one called Dev2. And of course, my password is different. Anyway, I won't bother showing that, but you can connect multiple dev environments. Okay, so let me get back to DevOps Center. My project. I should have connected to that other dev org because demos go better when things are working. Okay, so now I have my work item here. I connected to my dev org where I did my work. So now I, as the developer, can come in and I can add the metadata that I worked on to this work item. So this is kind of where things are getting going, right? This is where I'm actually going to get my work and get it into the system. So here I have a choice. I could either have DevOps Center create the branch for me, create the commit, do all the work, or I could do that work outside of DevOps Center in using Git and whatever tools I want to use, and I can just tell DevOps Center, here's the work has already been done. I'm going to choose the first one here because again, typically that's what you're going to want to do when you're using DevOps Center. But just to say, there is the option of working outside of DevOps Center if you want to. And so you can see this little pop-up here, it created a branch for me in Git. And if I go over here to Git, go back to my project here, I should see now there are 3 branches. So I created a new branch here called WI000012. So it's a branch that is named the same as my work item. So I can tell which branch belongs to which work item. Okay, so then it's telling me it's these 28 changes in this environment. Now, I, as a developer, need to know what has changed. I don't want all 28 of those things as part of this work item. I didn't just make 28 changes, but maybe I did, I don't know. But it can tell that there's these changes that have been made. And the way it can tell that is because of the source tracking that's turned on. So DevOps Center has a directory of metadata, and it's comparing that with what's changed in the org, and it's saying, okay, I see these 28 changes. Now, if I know exactly what's changed, there's a link here to add components manually. So if I know I just did this one thing and I only want this one thing in, I don't have to tell it to pull the changes. I can just say, I'm going to add this myself. But maybe I'm not sure exactly what changed and I want some help finding the metadata. This is where DevOps Center can help you. It also conveniently has a little link here. You can click on that and it'll go to Git, and you can see the branch in Git. I'm going to tell it, pull the changes. It's going to pull those changes for me. Now this takes a little while to run. But here it's pulled all those different changes that it made. or that it sees. And this is where it can help me. Now, this is probably not super useful because it's like Alan Petersen made most of these changes, and that's me. But probably the modified on is something that's interesting. I can see here May 11th, so I can see who made the change. I can see the metadata type, and I can see when it was modified. These things can help me narrow down what metadata I actually care about. And so this here, it's sorted by modified, so I can see, okay, I can see the custom object, I can see the field, I can see the layout, maybe profiles, they're kind of weird, so I'm not gonna deploy those. But I have these 3 pieces of metadata I'm gonna be concerned with. So that's how DevOps Center can help you find the metadata that's changed, which is helpful. And you can sort these and stuff like that. Okay, and then assuming I got the changes I made, I can go down here and provide a comment. Comment is required. Probably good to put some explanation of what you're doing in there rather than just change something. Because comments are useful later on if somebody's looking inside the Git repo at the history of something, they can see why something has changed. But it requires that you just have something in there. And then I can commit my changes. And so when I do that, my changes get committed to the branch. And up here, there's a little spinner that tells me the commit is initiated. And behind the scenes, what's happening is DevOps Center using AWS is going, retrieving that metadata that I've specified, retrieving it from that Dev1 environment, and putting it into that branch and committing that branch into GitHub, and then pushing it, committing it to the Git repo and then pushing it to GitHub. So once this is done, I should see, if I look here, and I switch over to this WI branch, I can see that this branch had some changes, and I could actually go in and go to the actual object, and I can see there's an object here, Rocky user, that just got created here in the GitHub. So this branch, we can keep this open as long as necessary to incorporate changes. So I always recommend when developers are working on things that they commit their work. So I just made some changes, I do my commit. Now maybe I'm going back and I'm making another change. Maybe I'm adding another field. So I'm going to create a new field, a number field. Call it counter. So I might not be done my work yet, but I still can commit stuff without fear of pushing it to the next environment. So I can keep committing as I'm doing my work, and I always encourage people, do this at least once a day, commit your work. But really, whenever you're done working on something, commit it. Because that way, if somebody, especially if this is a shared environment, somebody could come along and step on your changes very easily. And you want to know if that happens. And you may not know if you aren't committing your work. So maybe you made a change, you went for lunch, you didn't commit anything, you come back, you do some more work, and then you commit at the end of the day. You might end up pulling in someone else's changes accidentally just because they made changes that you didn't expect. So by committing frequently, you can tell when things change. Now, if this is a private sandbox or a private Scratch org, there's less of a concern for that. But in a shared environment, that's one of the common things that developers have is yeah, I just changed that layout. What's going on? And then somebody else had come in and made another change to it. Okay, so I just made another change. So if I go here and I pull changes, I should see the other change that I just made. So here's my counter. So I can see these two changes were just made. It doesn't give a time, which would be kind of nice. Commit those. Okay, so let's say I'm done my work. Once this is committed, I'm done my work. I'm happy with where things are at. I'm ready to pass it on to the next person for doing QA and stuff. So as a developer, the way I signal that something is done is I go up here and say create review. And behind the scenes, what this is done is in GitHub. Oops. What's this tab here? I go to GitHub here. It's actually created a pull request for me. A pull request is basically a request from one branch to merge the changes that have been made in that branch into the main branch or into another branch. So it's a request. Nothing's been merged yet, but this is now, it's someone else's job to review the changes, make sure that things are okay, and then approve those changes. So that would be the next person's job. My tech lead or some other person would verify the functionality. Yeah, you created the field, the validation rule, updated layout, whatever was happening. And then once that review has been done, then they would go into the pull request. They would say merge it. And then they would mark this as ready to promote. Once the work item is marked as ready to promote, now it shows up in the pipeline. I can see here the work item is now in the pipeline. So now it's ready to go to the next environment, and then from there onward. So if I had multiple work items, I could select the ones that I want to promote here. In this case, I just have the one, but I could select multiples if I wanted to. And this button here says promote selected. So I can say, okay, promote the ones that I've selected here. And then it's going to go through the process. It says, okay, I'm going to promote the changes that are not in the QA stage. Do I need to run any tests? There are no Apex classes here, so I don't need to worry about that. So I click on promote, and that fires off the promotion process. And this is actually doing a deploy into that next environment. So if I were to go into that QA environment, once this is done, I would see that Rocky Point object created with its fields and its page layout. And then the process to then promote that to production is the same thing. I would select the items I want to promote here. I can bundle them if I wanted to, or I can promote them individually. And then I could promote those into production as well. So just click on that to make that happen. So let's say QA was happening. I can give it a version. Again, this is just for documentation purposes. The version doesn't really version anything. It's just a way of saying this is what's getting deployed. But now this would be going into production. And then here in production, looked at my object manager, I should see a Rocky Point. It's already there. Oh no, that's Rocky user. Oh no, that is the custom object. Yeah, so it's actually already deployed there. So it was usually it's slower than that, and I have to wait a little while. But by the time I switched over, it was already deployed. So this object got deployed with its fields and its page layout. Now it's in production. So that's basically all these steps here. Yeah, it's more interesting looking at it live, I think. Yeah, I didn't have the other dev environment connected, but when you do have multiple development environments, you want to take the changes that have been promoted and back promote them to the other dev environment. So if somebody's made a change in this dev environment, you need to get that change over to the other dev environment at some point to make sure they're in sync. And there's a little link here that says not in sync. And you can click on that and it'll back promote the items you select to that other dev environment. Merge conflicts. Whenever we are involved with version control, there is the chance of merge conflicts. Merge conflict basically happens when two people have made a change to the same thing on different branches, and now we're both trying to get them merged into a branch, and there's a conflict. And Git can't figure out which one to select, so some human has to intervene and say, okay, this is the actual length of the field, not this other length. So it ends up being, a human has to look at it and say, this is the truth, this is not. Ultimately, you want to try and avoid merge conflicts if you can. So just various ways that they're caused, but some ways to present them. Try the biggest one is making small changes and make them frequently. So if you have branches out there that somebody's been working on for 3 weeks or something, and they haven't merged anything in their branch, they've just been working on this thing in their little silo, I can almost guarantee there will be a merge conflict at that point, because they've been off working and they haven't been incorporating the changes that other people have been making. So at some point, when they try and merge in, there's going to be a conflict. So one way to avoid that is just try not to have long-lived branches like that. If somebody's working on something that's completely isolated from everybody else, then maybe it's not that bad a thing. And maybe you're not going to get a merge conflict, but every once in a while, it'll still surprise you. And then the other thing is, make sure that your changes are very small. So if it's like 2 fields in the layout or something, and somebody else had a field that they named the same for whatever reason, now we're trying to merge them and there's a conflict there, well, that can be resolved fairly easily. But if there's 20 things that are all conflicting, now the merge conflict is a headache. So if you keep things small and you're merging frequently, you're also less likely to encounter merge conflicts. So, like, going back to what I was saying earlier, I tell developers on the project, try and commit stuff as frequently as possible, push it up, so that way other people have visibility in terms of what you're doing. And then if somebody else, you made a change, you created an object, and somebody's creating a flow that uses that object, they don't go and create the same object themselves. They can then pull down your object into their branch. So just doing stuff like that can help. And of course, communications, that's a big thing. Understanding what other people are working on. And if 2 people are working on the same Apex class, well, probably not a good idea for both of them to work on that same thing at the same time. So just wrapping up, does DevOps Center have everything? Absolutely not. Already mentioned other Git providers, doesn't have those. Integration with project management systems like Jira doesn't have that. I don't know if it will ever have that. There is the thought that third parties will develop stuff to provide this functionality. So Atlassian, if they want to create a plugin for DevOps Center, and so it can pull work items from Jira stories and create them automatically, Atlassian could totally do that. And the idea is that third parties will probably pick up some of the slack here, because Salesforce can't create a solution that's going to work for everybody's project management system. This team's using Azure. These guys use Jira. These guys use some other thing. Rather not get into that if possible. GitHub providers is something that they are working on. That's a little harder to implement. Some CI/CD automation. This is just something I would like to see more of. So I'd like maybe some approval processes in place so that when something's approved, it would just get promoted automatically rather than having to click on a button to do it. Some more flexibility with the interfaces. So like I said before, these are Salesforce objects. You can create your own fields and track other stuff. So one of the things that is interesting for me is creating in the work item, creating a field for like level of effort. So I'd have an idea how hard an item is going to be, maybe how many hours I'm expecting it to take, maybe something where I could actually log time against a work item. So I'd know how much time people are spending compared to things. These are all things I can build. The challenge is none of that is going to show up in the standard DevOps Center interface, because that's all Lightning components that have been developed. They're displaying certain fields, but they're not displaying everything that's in there. So I can create a field that just doesn't show up. It's there in the standard Salesforce interface. I can create a tab and go look at work items there, but it's not going to be in the DevOps Center interface yet. So that's something I'd like. Doing org snapshots is another thing I'd like. This is something I typically do when I set up DevOps on a project. Is I'll just do, especially when there's like an integration org where I have multiple work streams going into one place, I'll just do like a daily snapshot of that, just back it up to Git. And that way I can see what changes are made over time. Metadata org comparisons that inside the tool would be nice. So if I could say, right now it says, okay, these are the changes I see, but I'd like to see, what is it seeing in terms of changes? If it's something brand new, it's not that interesting. But if it was like being able to do like a diff between metadata inside the interface, that would be kind of nice. Supporting packages, manual steps. So oftentimes there's pre or post deployment steps that need to be documented. Be nice if there's a way to document those. As a work item or a manual work item or something, data deployment, and then non-linear pipeline. So right now the pipeline is very linear. If I had like a hotfix org or something that I also want to incorporate, I can't really do that in the pipeline. I'd probably create a new project just with a hotfix org going to prod to represent that in DevOps Center. And then, of course, there are alternatives. Lots of companies out there that offer DevOps stuff, but they come at a cost.
Tony, you had a question, right?
Alan?
Yes.
So,
sorry.
What is the largest customer that we at Salesforce have that you're aware of that's using DevOps as opposed to a FlowSum, a gear set, or whatever?
I don't know offhand. Every customer I've worked with so far has not been using DevOps Center.
Okay. It's
now,
fairly new. I get that too.
Yeah. It was really cool because it was in beta for like a year. So you could actually play, and it was an open beta, so you could play with it for a long time. But whenever something is beta, people are like, yeah, I'll play with it, but I'm not actually going to use it anywhere because it's too scary to use. So it just became GA. I've been doing presentations for architects because most of our internal architects have no idea about DevOps Center, and some still use change sets. Right now, I would say any project where people are using change sets, they could easily switch over to DevOps Center and just get a better DevOps system going on. If you're already using Capado or FlowSum or something, you're probably taking advantage of a lot of those features that DevOps Center doesn't have, and I don't think probably doesn't make sense for you to switch from those tools,
Sure.
even though they cost you money. Hopefully you're getting something from those tools, like data deployments or something that DevOps Center doesn't provide.
Got it. Okay. All right. I was just wondering if we've seen larger customers doing it, and if so, are they creating their own hooks into it for automation and things like that? But because that'll be interesting to see as well as we do deploy to larger customers. So.
Yep.
One of the neatest things I saw that you presented here was, I guess, with change sets, you'd have to look up all your changes and have those and manually enter those, where this you can pull the changes. So that in itself looks like a great time saver.
Yeah.
So in the org I'm working in is just me and a senior admin, and we don't use Jira. We have a custom app that he actually built for us that our users are submitting like bugs and feature requests and everything through, and it's creating records. So it's pretty awesome to see that we could potentially pull that in and link it to each individual work item. That's pretty cool. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Okay. Anyone else have a question or a comment? Well, for those who are left, be watching out. I guess our next meeting will be around June 8th. I think that's the first Thursday of the first full week of the month of June. So we'll be putting something out there. Alan, thank you for your time, the presentation. This was a lot of information for us to absorb. I'm so glad we have a recording that we can go back and try to put this in practice. So that's going to be helpful. But we do appreciate your time and the wonderful presentation that you gave.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, I'm always happy to help out. It's my email's easy, alan.petersen@salesforce.com. Just have to spell it right. It's one L in Alan and all E's in Petersen. So yeah. Any misspelling there, I'm not going to get it.
Alan, can you share the deck, or is that not allowed?
Yeah, I think I can. I don't have anything in here that's not publicly available, so I don't mind sharing it. Sure.
That would be good.
Well, I want to thank you so much for this, Alan.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm really excited to learn more about the DevOps. My very small foray into change sets was very daunting, and to see how you can pull the changes in when you're verifying, one thing to the next, and not have to worry about, okay, I've cloned all this, and then I have to verify all this, and you just can see it sitting there. It's like, I don't have to sweat it so hard, So.
And again, the biggest thing is version control, being able to see the changes over time. You can go back and say, why does this field even there? Right? Who's using this field? Why did we create it? If you have that version history, you can say, oh yeah, here's the item, and it corresponds to this Jira ticket, and this is why we did it. So it's super helpful.
I do think it's probably going to take admins from like the more like you said, traditional change set model to more, I guess, traditional development practices, which is nice to see it kind of like evolving a bit, because I know how like it can feel a little messy sometimes, even like with us, with the two of us, like potentially stepping on each other's toes, but like having those best practices, like moving small amounts of information at a time, rather than trying to push all your changes at once. I think that's good for the profession in general, especially admins.
So I did think of one question before we let you go, Alan. So
sure.
As we're making those small changes and we're committing them over to that sandbox, that first step there, I guess maybe standard practice would be you get them all over there, everything you're going to do, you do your testing, you're happy with it, and then maybe you move everything together to your production org. Is that?
Yeah, either it kind of depends. If you have like a constant work stream where we're always developing new stuff, then maybe you just have a set of things that you move together into production. But yeah, if it's like, okay, we haven't made any changes, oh, now we want to add this feature, and you work on it, then yeah, it's probably just a bundle that you're kind of moving over to the next org. So it kind of depends.
Okay. Anyone else have a question or a comment?
Well, just along what you said, Mark, I was just thinking that it's nice because you can do small parts or big parts with this, whereas chain sets was like all or nothing. You had to do the whole thing in one shove, and that's why your sandboxes are so important to set up for all your testing prior to launching into production, or else you were really in a world of hurt if you made a mistake. So this seems like you can recover with the DevOps a lot more quickly. If you do something, if you pull something in and then put it to production, it's like, oh, okay, I can fix that really quickly instead of having to, full stop.
Okay. Well, in respect of your time, Alan, we're going to call it an evening. Thanks again for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
We hope to see everyone again at our next meeting.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank your
you,
cat.
Alan.
Thank your cat too. He was. I saw him there initially. I thought you had a sculpture of like an owl, the way he was sitting and his wings were out, and then it moved, and I went, "What's behind him?" I realized it was your cat.
Yep.